So, I asked you, the YouTube community, what cards you want to see added to Rush Duel Links. I gave an example of Apocalypse Beast Gear World. This is a card I thought was going to be in the Heavy Metal Scream mini box as a way to kind of counteract the incredibly popular Dragias 7-Zone Magician decks we see. If we read the card, you would see it provides not only an attack boost to cards like Heavy Metal, but also makes Dragias and 7-Zone Magician both lose 300 attack. It seemed like a great choice, and I was baffled we did not get it. In the time since I made this post, the Beast Gear monsters have been revealed, but there's still no sign of the field spell. I'm really interested to see if we end up getting them in a structure deck, or maybe if this ends up being a skill-exclusive card. But enough about that, let's see what you all said. Basil Mudcup has a few good answers here. Maximums are definitely on everyone's mind, especially since Nail is such a major character and should be coming out soon. We don't know exactly when, and they could go ahead and try to put in a filler character or two, but I would expect us to get maximum cards by March at the latest. However, I don't actually necessarily want to see them in the current state of the game. A 4,000 attack point monster has very few answers in the current format, and while we are getting Acebreaker in a structure deck during January, I would also like to see a card like Shock Dragon and some other ways to deal with these monsters in the format before we get the maximums unleashed on the ladder. Moving on to the legend cards, I do think Flame Ruler is a pretty good choice. I love Noodles, and it's clearly not going to be an overpowered card in the context of the format when aggro decks could be running something like Summoned Skull instead. If we go to the final card, Trap Hole, I think it is a pretty interesting one as there's a lot of layers to it. We currently have Widespread Ruin, which can destroy a powerful attacking monster, but if we get a maximum monster into the game, they're going to be immune to trap cards. So Widespread Ruin and Trap Hole both won't work, but if you have a maximum monster on the field, and you have something to protect it, you're going to want Trap Hole instead. And that's because Acebreaker is able to destroy it with effect, and you're never going to need to battle to get over the maximum. So Trap Hole is a way for you to destroy the Acebreaker when it comes onto the field. However, the leaked skill for Acebreaker has support for Aim Eagle, which would then let you special summon Acebreaker and dodge Trap Hole, meaning that Widespread Ruin might be better to save your life points after your Yggdrago gets destroyed. It leads to an interesting, impactful deck building choice that I would be interested in seeing in the game. Michael mentions maximums as well, but also extra spice the Elite Noodle Ninja, which I want to see in the game. We need all the Noodle support immediately. 1,000 points of burn damage is actually pretty significant in a 6,000 life point format, and drawing a card to cycle away those low-level pyros and get to other cards, such as additional back row, or even just a better beater. For example, you can get rid of a stock the Noodle Ninja and try to draw into a space for Fire Yarrow, and it might actually make Noodle Art Boost playable. Currently, a couple of people are hitting King of Games with the Noodle Art Boost skill, but I think the best way to play it is to ignore the Archive skill. That way you can run cards like Dragias. If we get cards like Extra Spice, it makes playing a pure version more viable. But Felicia brings in a couple of interesting cards. Chemical Cure Red and Blue are currently in Roman's level 30 deck. I do think I probably want to wait on these cards until we get Fusion, because they do have the Chemical Cure Purple. However, they would be totally fine to add to the game now, and might even make Red Medicine see some play. Felicia also brings in some of the more recent Psychic support. I think something like Dream Ticket might be a little bit too powerful for the current format, but the Lullabind would be a totally fine addition, I think. Worst case scenario, they could always give it the Limit 3 treatment. I don't think Psychics actually have anything on the list right now, so we can avoid making a Psychic pile with that. Gravity Sonic says 1,000 Knives, and that is actually a card I really do want to see. I've been testing a Dark Magician deck, and I think it is almost good. 1,000 Knives, of course, would be another way to out those maximum monsters whenever we get them, and there was a skill leaked a long time ago that implied we might be getting the card. I think 1,000 Knives would be a great card to add to the game. But I didn't actually just ask on YouTube. I also made a post in the Discord server. And for this one, I gave an example of Counter Shield. Counter Shield is a trap card that is able to lower an opponent's attack by 1,000, but they have to be attacking a normal monster. And you need to be using a normal monster with some defense points. So it works great with cards like Gazelle, but isn't going to work if your entire deck is filled with those 1500 attack, 0 defense normal monsters. But more importantly, it's also a big buff to decks like Servant of Dawn, where they are just incentivized to fill their entire high level count with random vanilla monsters. Having actual payoff to running these cards in place of something like Dragius is huge and is really needed to make them feel viable. And we see Paco mentioning Powerful Pierce. This is a card that gives 2 of your monsters piercing together. However, they must have the same level. The regular Pierce did release as a box you are in the first set, and it did see a little bit of play, but it's really not that great. Piercing Samurai kind of takes its place in the Yami Ruler deck, and everyone else, instead of running a Piercing card, decides to just run a Board Breaker. Whether that's Dragius, Twin-Edged Dragon, or something like Torn of the Windweaver to change a battle position. So having a more powerful Pierce card might be what we need to make piercing damage a consideration. And if it becomes a meta card, it can actually affect the right play. A lot of people obviously start their games with just setting as many cards as possible and passing. But if we have a lot of decks that are able to just inflict a ton of piercing damage, it can change the metagame on its own. Thothmageddon says Cyber Dragon, which is an interesting one to think about. So the important thing to note is that Cyber Dragon is not a legend card. And if you can run 3 of these, I think everyone would. However, the card isn't that powerful. If you think about it, cards like Flame Cerberus and Volcano Dragon don't see any play. And if they do, it's very fringe. On the other hand, 1500 vanilla monsters do see a fair amount of play. So if we have Cyber Dragon acting as a level 4 in most cases, that's a little bit too strong. But if we put it at limit 3, it's actually a big buff to decks who only have restrictions on the level 7 spot. And we know we won't have to deal with Cyber Dragon and Dragius together. So I think Cyber Dragon, we definitely cannot get the fusion support that goes alongside with it. But if we get it as a limit 3 monster, it would be okay. Like, I think it would be a good card and healthy as long as it's not combinable with other monsters like Dragius.